Hello YouTube, and welcome to a brand new lore video. Today we're talking about a personal interest of mine, the Forgotten Vale. First of all, sorry for the delay in this video, I know it's a day late. I left the charger of my laptop at work, meaning I couldn't work on this video at all on Wednesday and Thursday morning, meaning that the video contracted a day of delay. I'm very sorry for this, and even though now that I work 5 days a week, I try to keep on schedule with the videos. Unfortunately, I was dumb and left my charger, so the schedule was broken. Anyway, here we are. Ever since the Forgotten Vale was added to Skyrim with the Dawnguard DLC, I've been extremely fascinated by it. In addition to it being one of the most aesthetically pleasing places in the game, it's also got a really interesting story, so that's what we're going to talk about today. So, for starters, the Forgotten Vale is a collection of interconnected mountain valleys hidden in the Druidic Mountains. It's extremely isolated from the rest of Tamriel as it has no convenient access points, roads or anything like that. The only ways to get there are to either hike over the mountain ranges, which are pretty steep, or like the player doing the Dawnguard questline, traverse the Falmer-infested cave systems in the Druidic Mountains. Due to its extreme isolation, it's home to a lot of unique flora and fauna that haven't spread across the rest of Skyrim. A good example of this is the Gleam Blossom and the Poison Bloom plants, which both grow in the subterranean complexes in the Vale and even in some places that are above ground. The local wildlife has adapted to the life in the caves mostly with luminescent plants, as most wildlife in the Vale has black and green patterns on their hide, which is not very useful in the snow since, well, black and white is very much a contrast, but in the dark caves with illuminated plants this is an ideal camouflage. The Vale has been as isolated as it is now since basically forever, and sometime during the Mredic era the site was found by the Snow Elves. Back in those days the humans hadn't settled in Skyrim yet, and dominance over the province was completely held by Snow Elves. The Snow Elves were amazed by the Vale's beauty and some decided to settle there. Over the years, a small but flourishing community was living in the hidden Vale. They had good contact with the rest of the Snow Elf civilization, and eventually more elves would settle there. As the community grew, the peaceful valley eventually became a center of worship for the Snow Elf central deity, Auriel. Over time, the Vale would come to be known as the Chantry of Auriel, with many buildings intent for worship like way shrines and temples being built all over the valley. Near the beginning of the First Era, the leader of the Auriel cult in the Snow Elf civilization, the Archcurate of Auriel, essentially a sort of pope, also moved into the valley after a very large sanctum was constructed in the Vale for worshipping purposes. In this period, many Snow Elf pilgrims would come to the Vale to reach enlightenment and become one with their deity, Auriel, and to get an audience with the Archcurate, the leader of this religion. To do so, they needed to follow the Road of Enlightenment. This road began at Darkfall Cave, the entrance to the Vale, and ended at the Inner Sanctum, where a pilgrim would be welcomed by the Archcurate himself. The Road of Enlightenment started at Darkfall Cave, the darkness of the cave symbolizing the absence of enlightenment, and once there they would be teleported into the Vale by this way shrine of illumination after meditating and practicing mantras with the prelate or priest of the way shrine. They would then travel to the way shrines of sight, learning, resolution and radiance. They would repeat this process of meditation and mantras so that they would attain the qualities associated with every way shrine. At every way shrine they would fill a large ewer named the Initiate's Ewer with a bit of water at the way shrines, and once they had visited all 5 of them, the ewer would be full and they had to bring it to the Inner Sanctum. According to one of the few books of that time that we have left, many of these initiates would arrive at the Sanctum as mere husks of their former self, having endured great hardships along the way. They would be very tired but also very fulfilled when they would empty the ewer at the Inner Sanctum and be welcomed by Archcurate himself. This process made them one with Auriel and apparently got them some form of enlightenment. During the war with the Nords that raged in the First Era, the Chantry remained completely untouched, as its existence was a sort of secret of the Snow Elves, and it was unknown to the Nords at the time. This meant that when the Snow Elves were eradicated around Skyrim, and when the Snow Prince, the last leader of the Snow Elves on who I made a video, lost their last stand, it forced many Snow Elves into hiding and forced them towards betrayal by the Dwemer, as many of you know. However, the Chantry remained untouched by this, while many Snow Elves who went for the Dwemer for aid and ended up being betrayed, transforming into the Twisted Falmer over the years after being blinded by the Dwemer. Some snow elves actually survived in their original form in the Chantry. Even some snow elves who remembered the Chantry fled there after the war and were essentially refugees in the Chantry, but they were welcomed with open arms by the religion of Ariel. The population of the Chantry stayed alive and well for many more centuries, surviving in silence and silently worshipping their god. Sometimes snow elf survivors would arrive at the Vale and be assimilated into its population, but these survivors became rarer and rarer over the years as they were all being hunted down by the Nords. In mainland Skyrim, all remnants of snow elf civilization were over time destroyed by the Nords. Their temples, buildings, architecture, literature, graves, bodies, they were all destroyed in some attempt to wipe the snow elves from the face of the earth by the Nords and have no reminders of their civilization. This succeeded as we find almost no reference to their culture in Skyrim. The only true bastion of snow elf ruins left is the Forgotten Vale, which never fell in the hands of the Nords. Because the Chantry never fell to Nords, it met its end a couple of centuries after the Nords' eradication of the snow elves at the hands of, well, essentially their own kin. Somewhere during their time in hiding, the Archcurate, at the time a man named Vurther, was infected by vampirism by one of his own initiates. This affliction caused Ariel to stop recognizing him as the Archcurate and essentially turn his back on the Archcurate. This drove Vurther, the Archcurate, angry and insane. He kept his affliction and is shut off by Ariel, a secret from the Chantry's residence, as he grew ever bitter. He decided that he wanted to get back to Ariel for turning his back on him, so he devised a plan. He wanted to blot out the sun, to essentially stop Ariel's effect on our world. He would do this by using Ariel's bow, a holy weapon kept in the Chantry, and the blood of a pure-blood vampire. This would somehow, if you shoot at the sun, he figured out that this would blot out the sun, as it would be the exact opposite of the intended process. So he created a prophecy and spread word of it around Tamriel that one day a Dreadlord would rise and use the blood of a vampire and Ariel's weapon to blot out the sun. He did this in hopes of luring a pure-blood vampire to him, because a pure-blood vampire that would want to do this would of course want to get Ariel's bow, which was with him, and then he just waited patiently for many centuries. After some time, the people in the Chantry likely started to suspect that something was wrong, so he decided that he had to destroy the Chantry itself so that he himself could continue waiting for a vampire to show up, so that he could take his revenge on Ariel by blotting out the sun. Through unknown means, the Archcurate then lured hordes of the betrayed Falmer into the Chantry, who had by now turned into their own twisted sadistic forms that we know from the depths of Skyrim. And these hordes of betrayed quickly overwhelmed the Chantry. Only a few knights of the Chantry were left to protect it, but they were no match for the hordes of twisted creatures. The Chantry were overrun and its residents killed. There were only two sole survivors. These were Vurther, the Archcurate, and a lone knight, his brother, Knight Paladin Galabor. How Galabor survived, we don't exactly know, but we do know that Vurther survived because the betrayed simply didn't attack him. This whole thing led Galabor to believe that the betrayed used some kind of magic on his brother to corrupt him, but the contrary was true, as his brother had plotted the entire downfall of the Chantry to begin with. Galabor would continue to try and guard the Chantry best he could, while Vurther remained locked away in the inner sanctum, waiting for a day that a vampire would show up. And that day came, well, several centuries later, as the Dragonborn, accompanied by Serana, would show up during the Dawnguard questline, and they would eventually kill Vurther to get Ariel's bow. Most people already know this part of the story, so I'll not get into it with very much detail. So, after this final bloodshed of Vurther, only a single snow elf remained in the Chantry, Knight Paladin Galabor. By now it was called the Forgotten Vale, as it was no longer really a functioning Chantry. It's dotted with broken ruins of a once proud civilization, and it might as well be the only remnant of snow elf culture that survived the Nords' attempt to wipe the snow elves from Skyrim's history. As such, it would be extremely valuable to do, as a site to in-universe historians and even lore researchers like me. The Forgotten Vale is, in my opinion, very interesting, as we can still see large parts of snow elf architecture and magical contraptions made by them. This is part of the reason why I've always been very interested in this system of valleys. Anyway, that concludes the story of the Forgotten Vale. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, and I hope you stick around until the next video, when it launches next Thursday. And before I end this video, allow me to vocally thank my top patrons, Mr. Bernardo Binda, Metaloid1v1, Mr. Gabriel Binda, Mr. Christmas and Mr. Para. These people, along with the others on screen, are the ones who make my weekly lore series possible, and I'm very grateful for it. That said, this is my cue to get back to work on my next video. Sorry for the delay in this one, I will try not to do it next week. And yeah, I'll see you next Thursday. Bye bye.